What is your verdict about what Cameron has said? Is this a big moment?
Well, I have to say my verdict is similar to yours. This is a very significant moment. This is the first time UK Foreign Secretary does say that recognition of the State of Palestine is not linked to a final agreement with Israel, i.e. finally removing Israel's veto over Palestinian statehood. Going back to your introduction, that veto is very solid. Netanyahu and all previous governments have not wanted to accept the very idea of a Palestinian state. That's number one. Number two...
Sorry, just before you get on to number two, you make it sound historic.
It is historic. It is historic because the whole Palestinian cause agony has started in this very city, in this very country. It is historic because it was a lord before him, his predecessor, Lord Balfour, who promised our land without consulting us, that moment of colonial arrogance, whereby we, as a people, were cancelled in these 67 words by Lord Balfour. We were no longer a nation. In these 67 words, Lord Balfour said that the Jewish state that will be established in Palestine have to respect the rights of the non-Jewish minorities. We, the natives of the land who have lived there for millennia, Andrew, the birthplace of Christianity, the cradle of civilizations, the hub between East and West, we were reduced to just non-Jewish minorities. You have a foreign secretary, the Cameron Declaration that says that recognition of the State of Palestine is not linked to a bilateral process between Palestinians and Israelis, and that it is a Palestinian right, effectively, and it is a UK responsibility, is a historic moment.
And he uses the word irreversible as well.
Yes, he did.
He said, he wants now to start to envisage what a Palestinian state might look like. Now, there are difficulties here as well, of course. I've spoken a couple of times to Mark Regev, the Israeli spokesperson, who says that he envisages a state which is, as it were, a bit less than a state. In other words, they would not accept a Palestinian state which was able to defend itself, which had a military. How would you feel about that idea?
The Mark Regevs of the day and all Israeli mouthpieces are reframing occupation. They're just rebranding what occupation, colonization, control, subjugation means, which means less of an state. They want to continue controlling the Palestinian areas, call it a state, but it's a Mickey Mouse state. That's what they have in their head.
Yes. So no Mickey Mouse state. What happens to Israeli settlers in the West Bank if there is a Palestinian state, which I assume would have to include all of the West Bank?
Well, just a couple of hours ago, the UK Foreign Office issued an official statement saying that all these settlements are illegal. Those are very well defined in international law as war crimes. You cannot transfer your population into the occupied territory and in the process ethnically cleanse the inhabitants of the land. Now, because they are illegal, the overall idea is that they have to go, like Israel did dismantle settlements in Sinai during the peace treaty with Israel, in south of Lebanon, in Gaza before. So we shouldn't...
I understand that. Is there any possibility of a mutual transfer agreement of some kind, do you think, where Palestinians could go back to the lands that they had been on before the Israelis took them, and Israeli settlers could carry on living where they are? In other words, that both Israel and a future Palestinian state had substantial minority populations from the other?
The state of Palestine will be, like all other states, welcoming any people who want to come and live legally in the state of Palestine. But those people cannot be living on stolen land. Any state would have judicial system, would have courts and judges. And if a judge finds that settler to have been living on a privately owned land, they will rule that that person has to be evicted. We don't want to go through that process. However, any person who want to apply, like you do in the UK, for a residency, wants to live, wants to practice or invest, wants to do business, ahlan wa sahlan, as we say, they're welcome.
Do you accept that none of this can happen until Hamas is eradicated? Because I have spoken to Jewish people who are absolutely terrified of continuing to live along a border where Hamas are on the other side.
They should be terrified of the continuation of a situation that lasted for for 75 years. They should
but
be
they're
terrified.
especially terrified about Hamas.
Hamas is not the reason why we have a conflict. Hamas is an outcome of the conflict. So is many other Palestinian political factions. To think that everything will end once you end one of the Palestinian political factions is really rather naive. We need to think about the root causes, and the Israeli public need to realize that they have to come up with a final sort of conclusion that they cannot have the cake and eat it too.
And if we are at the very beginning of a process towards a Palestinian state, how important are the Arab countries in the area? How important are the Egyptians and the Jordanians and indeed the Saudis in making it happen?
Very important, and all these actors have been trying their best. There is a regional pact called the Arab Peace Initiative, is a Saudi initiative, whereby should Israel ends its occupation of Palestinian and Arab land that began in 1967, the entire Arab world, and with it the entire Muslim world, 57 states will immediately normalize with Israel. Israel will become a state in the region. There will be cooperation, economic and what have you. The issue is Israel has placed its occupation and expansion above any other consideration. That's a fact. And never this Arab Peace Initiative was picked by any Israeli government. So the Arab world now is repackaging that, representing that in a way that would be hopefully picked by the Israeli public.
And David Cameron has been talking directly in the same room with Benjamin Netanyahu, presumably including about this. So he knows how steely Netanyahu is on this subject. Do you believe this is an impossible dream so long as Benjamin Netanyahu is Prime Minister of Israel?
And also it will be an impossible dream so long as the international community does not come with a stick. And I mean by a stick, an ability to enforce, an ability to impose sanctions, an ability to support accountability. Without all those, carrots only did not work for a long time and shall not work. We need to make sure that all parties are aligned with international law, respect and uphold international law, and if they don't, accountability is waged. That's why the ICJ and The Hague and what happened last week was historic, because for the first time, Israel now officially on trial for genocide. We need to make sure that the law is upheld.
We don't have an awful lot of time, Ambassador Zomlot, but can I ask one final thing? If this is the beginning of a process with David Cameron beginning to lead it, surely the crucial question is what America now does. The next bit has to go to Washington.
No, that's why I think it was very significant and historic, because it started in London. Because while America is needed to be on the table, America cannot be the only player on this. It cannot continue having a monopoly of this and excluding any others. This conflict and this issue is much bigger than one actor. And America has proven to be unable to play the role of an honest, neutral mediator for reasons you know, Andrew. Israel in America is not a foreign policy issue. It's a domestic issue.
Always has been.
Yes,
always has been.
We need the UK, we need Europe, we need China, we need South Africa, we need the world, we need Brazil to help America get to its own goals.
A big day for Palestinians. Ambassador, thank you very much for coming in and talking to me. It's really appreciated. Now, let's hear the view of Alicia Kearns. She's chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I asked her if she also agrees that the Foreign Secretary's comments today mark at least a significant shift from the British government.
I do. So not necessarily the recognition we need a two-state solution. That's been the UK government's position for a very long time. But his suggestion that we might recognise Palestine, this is a fundamental change in UK position. It's a very welcome one from my perspective. But what I need to tease out of the government over the next few days is this a posturing position to show Israel that unless they reform their behaviours, unless they change some of their targeting, that there are tools that we have available to us? Or is it a genuine commitment towards a Palestine state, which is where we should be going?
In other words, I suppose, does he mean it? And now we know that David Cameron has felt quite strongly about this policy for a very long time. He's been pro-Palestinian, interested in Palestine for a long time. And the way he talks about it, we must sort of understand, scope out, sketch out, if you like, what a future Palestinian state would feel like, would look like. It doesn't feel very airy-fairy. It feels like he wants a proper plan.
I think he does want a proper plan. Look, he's a serious grown-up politician with serious grown-up plans. We've seen since he came in as Secretary of State that he has shifted the government's position gradually and carefully, like someone who has held the reins before knows how to do. And I do think he wants a serious plan. He wrote to me only this week to confirm that my proposal since November that we needed a Palestinian contact group, that he is flying around the Middle East to do exactly that. But I think also what's good about him is he's very fair and balanced. I think it's very difficult to say he's either, rabidly pro-Israel or rabidly pro-Palestine. I think he's very balanced and he genuinely is focused, I believe, and I do think this is unfinished business for him, towards getting towards a solution that ends the instability.
He is quite clearly shifting the dial, however. Yes. And that requires, if it's going to get anywhere, the Americans along on side as well. So presumably the next part of this is to persuade the Americans of the same idea.
Yes, but I think that requires a lot more work. And in an election year, I think that's far less likely. Having been in DC only 2 weeks ago, look, there were some who were saying, let's not give support to Ukraine, instead give more support to Israel. I think this has become a very difficult political issue in America. For us to adopt recognition of Palestinian statehood, I think it's important we say we don't need the US to come on board to do that. That should be something the UK, on its own merits, in its own way, should make a decision on. Many other countries have recognised them. But on the wider shift towards a solution, of course, we need the Americans.
We are responsible for what we say, but what we can't do is shift things on the Middle East, particularly, I would suggest, while Benjamin Netanyahu is there as Prime Minister, because he's already made it clear he is completely, fundamentally, viscerally and entirely against this idea.
Absolutely, and I think there are serious questions about how we get to a long-term peace proposal while he's still in charge, but also how little the Israeli government seems to be listening. So we had the ICJ interim ruling last week. A lot of that ruling was based on the language, the rhetoric of the Israeli government, and yet you saw Ben Gvir only on Sunday. I think they're now saying it was either 10 or 100, I don't want to get that number wrong, but a large number of the Israeli government attended this conference over the weekend saying we must remove all Palestinians and extend settlements even further. I mean, they don't seem to be listening. For people who are genuine friends of Israel, this is a very, very dangerous moment, isn't it? I think it's so difficult for all of us. I've sat in many bunkers working with Israeli soldiers. I had such pride in working alongside them and the way in which they conducted themselves. But we are seeing an Israeli state who, again, as you and I discussed last March, we haven't learnt how to be a critical friend to them. You have an Israeli population who themselves were deeply unhappy with the Netanyahu government. So we are in a really difficult place where domestic Israeli politics is the furthest away from peace that we need them to be.
And meanwhile, the IDF are today doing things that you utterly abhor, including attacking a British medical charity.
So this is truly horrifying. So we saw on the 19th of January a British siloed building that is completely isolated from others. It was the home to Medical Aid for Palestine, a British charity, and the IRC, which of course David Miliband is chief executive of. It was bombed by the Israeli Defence Forces. We know that from an F-16 jet. But on the 22nd of December, the UK Defence Attaché in Tel Aviv had confirmation from the IDF that they knew this was a humanitarian site. They'd marked it as sensitive and it'd been marked as humanitarian. So what changed in just under a month that the IDF went from saying this is a protected site to being bombed? And we were very lucky. There were 4 British GPs inside it. They were harmed, but thankfully their lives weren't taken. The government says they've raised it with the Israelis. I think really we're looking for the Israeli ambassador needs to be called in to answer on this, and we need the Israelis to answer how in the world a site like this, a humanitarian protected site, was bombed.
It's very, very significant. What would you say to some of your colleagues who, when Andrew Mitchell was addressing the House and all of this earlier on today, were worried that talking about a two-state solution, talking about recognising a Palestinian state was effectively rewarding Hamas for their terrorist activities?
I think we have to be really, really careful about this. I abhor everything about Hamas. I think I'm the only MP who stood up and said that what they did on October 7th was a crime against humanity. I believe that. But we cannot and we must separate the Palestinian cause with the terrorists who have tried to control and subdue the Palestinian people and who took control in 2006. There have not been elections since. They do not represent the Palestinian people. Gaza is not all of Palestine. I think we have to be really careful about this. Just as when I lobby my criticisms against the Israeli government for some of their actions, I'm not criticising the Israeli people or the state of Israel. And I think for those who wish to condemn those who deny Israeli statehood, they must also be equally willing to condemn those who deny Palestinian statehood.